So what do you guys think of the Stones coming and playing the Enmore Theatre?
It's good. They're playing in our backyard. Yeah, it's good.
How far away from here do you guys
10
live?
minutes.
10 minutes away.
In the first place, people think of Angus Young's fiery guitar riffs, electrifying stage personality, and unwavering dedication to pure rock and roll. There is another side to the ACDC reputation that not everyone knows about, though. It's not the schoolboy uniform and never-ending energy. When it came to bands, Angus didn't put up with many of them. He once said that he was personally very lazy, but that didn't stop him from being mean to some of rock's biggest stars. And like his slashing solos, his criticisms were sharp and didn't give in. The Ramones were one of his most well-known targets. A lot of people like how the Ramones take rock music down to its most basic elements: fast, loud, and unrepentant simplicity. People praise them as the band that brought new life to the style. But for Angus Young, punk wasn't the change it said it was. He thought that what the Ramones and other punk bands were doing wasn't new or innovative at all, but just going over old ground. He mentioned bands like the Small Faces and the Faces, which had added edge, attitude, and rawness to rock music many years before. For Angus, punk wasn't really a new movement. Instead, it was a stripped-down version of rock, with none of the depth or musicianship that older bands had. To put it simply, Angus didn't see punk as something new. He saw it as a hollow echo of the past, a loud front that lacked the skill and substance that real rock and roll required. Many people like punk for its daring energy and simple sound, but Angus Young wasn't one of them. It was very clear that he didn't trust the genre when he talked about the Ramones. The man Angus didn't hold back. "I heard one song and it didn't move me," said one. "It was better than my first band when I was 12. He thought that the Ramones' music was empty and sounded more like the work of a house band just starting out than that of professional musicians. These were the only things Angus didn't like, though. It included the whole punk movement. He said that punk bands were great because of their raw attitude, but they lacked the precise skill that had always made rock greats. All of that is possible. He said someone can put on a show but they can't really play. He didn't think punk simplicity was a good way for artists to show they were good at what they did. Rock and roll had always been more than just fun for Angus. It needed accuracy, skill, and musicianship. He thought that punk music was rebellious, but it lacked the skill and complexity that set bands like the Small Faces, the Faces, and even ACDC apart. He didn't see punk as the next step after rock. It was a step backward, and rawness' action put it above his real musical skill. In the 1970s and 1980s, Kiss and ACDC were two of the biggest names in rock music. Their huge stage presence and heavy songs ruled the scene. The two bands were always going to be compared. Even though they were both famous at the same time, Angus Young never really liked Kiss. Unlike bands that relied on showmanship, Angus thought that rock and roll should be based on raw energy, good musicianship, and attitude, not on smoke, costumes, or other distracting lights and noise. During his career, he never tried to hide the fact that he didn't like acts that put show over substance, and Kiss was the main offender in his eyes. Young made fun of the band in public for counting on fire-breathing makeup and blood-spitting stunts, instead of putting musical depth first. Fans were interested in the show, but Angus thought it was just a cover for bad lyrics and poor musicianship. He thought that real rock music never needed tricks. It only took great riffs, raw power, and a real link with the crowd. ACDC and Kiss were different because they had different ideas about life. While Kiss built their brand around show and shock value, ACDC focused on what was most important: a stripped-down set of music powered by Angus's powerful guitar playing and sheer energy. If Angus thought a band needed fireworks to keep people interested, he thought the music wasn't good enough on its own. When the idea of ACDC and Kiss going on a tour together came up, that difference became even clearer. ACDC made it clear where they stood. John Simmons, one of the founders and main members of Kiss, later said that ACDC had a chance to go on tour with them but turned it down. Simmons says that the choice was made because of different ideas. ACDC thought Kiss was more about showmanship than good music, and the Aussies didn't want to be a part of a show that was too showy for their simple, no-frills rock. Even though Kiss had a lot of commercial success, Angus Young never thought of them as musical peers. He thought that Kiss represented a type of rock that put too much emphasis on looks and stage presence. Millions of fans were enthralled by the fake faces, fire-breathing, and over-the-top costumes, but Angus wasn't one of them. He thought that real rock bands could rock the stage without outfits or fireworks. It should be enough just to hear the music. Both bands made marks on rock history in the end, but in very different ways. Kiss became known for being theatrical, while ACDC made a name for themselves by recording some of the rawest, hardest-hitting rock songs ever. That difference meant a lot to Angus. Rock and roll wasn't about putting on a show, it was about riffs, strength, and being real. Angus didn't just have harsh words for Kiss either. He didn't like Deep Purple just because he didn't like them. It came from a bad situation. Tensions between ACDC and Deep Purple's road crew reached a boiling point at the Sunbury Festival. This left Angus with a lasting image that made him dislike the band even more. The story of how Angus Young and Deep Purple broke up has changed many times over the years. For sure though, the stress made him hate the band for a long time. Young didn't try to hide how he felt when he talked to Guitar World. As he talked about the first time he saw Deep Purple live, it was clear that they had never struck him. He went to the show hoping to see one of rock's biggest stars put on a world-class show. He became unhappy and left instead. I paid money to see Deep Purple live once. He remembered, I thought, geez, this is silly. He wrote off the event as a letdown. Angus thought that their live show was hollow and based more on showmanship than real effect. He thought that their big show was just smoke and mirrors to hide the fact that they weren't really who they said they were. He didn't just say bad things on stage either. He said he had never been a fan of music. I've never been a fan of Deep Purple or bands like them. I hated it all the time. A lot of rock fans thought Deep Purple were the first bands to play hard rock and early heavy metal, but Young wasn't one of them. He even called them a poor man's Led Zeppelin, which was one of the meanest things he had ever said. He thought that Deep Purple lacked the raw energy that made rock real. Even though Ritchie Blackmore was amazing on guitar and John Lord was famous on the organ, Angus thought the band was too polished and theatrical and lacked the grit and fire that ACDC was known for. ACDC's music was short and simple, while Deep Purple's music was often long and complicated, sharp, riff-based, and powered by high-voltage energy with no frills. Angus Young thought that raw passion was what rock and roll was all about. He didn't like Deep Purple, and his criticism of them showed that. It was also a reaction against the growing trend of the time towards technical showmanship and complicated innovation. Hard rock bands like Deep Purple and even Led Zeppelin were praised for their bold and often difficult style. But Angus had a very different set of beliefs. Rock didn't need big frameworks or solos that went on and on. To him, the raw blues-based sound of AC/DC was all that was needed. It wasn't just an insult to call Deep Purple a poor man's Led Zeppelin. It was a statement of what you believe. Angus didn't think it was very useful for artists to hide behind virtuosity or theatrical performance. It was the raw energy, the punch of the riff, and the connection with the crowd that counted. Both bands would go down in history as some of the biggest names in hard rock. Deep Purple were known for being the first band to use heavy riffs and complicated arrangements, while ACDC's high-energy, stripped-down songs made them famous. But Angus's view never changed. He had a strong opinion about Deep Purple because of his own experiences and a strong disagreement with other people about what rock music should be. He didn't end there. Angus wasn't afraid to criticize bands that were already seen as untouchable icons, even before AC/DC became famous all over the world. One of those goals was the band Led Zeppelin, which is known for being a leader in new ideas. Young told Classic Rock magazine that he had been to one of their shows but wasn't impressed at all. Angus Young didn't like how Led Zeppelin's live shows were known for long improvisations and long set lists. A lot of it felt swollen and dull to him. He remembered that even though they played for 3 hours, the crowd was bored for 2.5 hours. People are wondering how a band with such a huge following could fail to keep people interested from the beginning to the end. Angus had an easy time with it. He thought that true rock and roll had fire and energy, but Zeppelin's live shows lacked those qualities. Their shows might have been technically amazing with long solos, tricky parts, and displays of pure skill. But for Young, those highlights seemed like problems, not strengths. It's bad. He also said that they should be the most exciting band in the world and was angry that so much ability was being wasted on what he saw as selfishness. And Angus wasn't the only one who thought that way. Led Zeppelin had a huge following of devoted fans, but critics and even some concert-goers sometimes said that their long jams and endless improvisations lacked the tight, electrifying punch of their studio records. Young could not forgive that. He thought that rock and roll should be straight, hard-hitting and full of energy. Things that he thought Zeppelin's live shows missed too often. He thought that Led Zeppelin more copied the idea of rock and roll than lived it. Even though they had the look, the mystery, and the status of a legend, their acts lacked the immediate thrill that Angus thought was what made the genre alive. This point of view brought to light a major intellectual difference. Led Zeppelin tried to make big songs and epic journeys, but ACDC made their name with simple, no-nonsense rock that never stopped moving. Both bands made history in the rock world. But Angus Young's opinion never changed. He didn't care about his name as long as the music didn't get people excited. For Angus Young, it was easy to tell what a great band was. Show it off on stage every night, with non-stop energy that keeps the crowd on their feet. That means that Led Zeppelin failed the test. When it came to ACDC, their rock and roll attitude was clear from the start. Not many bands have stayed as true to their roots as this one. Even as styles changed over the years, they never stopped making music with a raw, high-voltage sound. There are no sacrifices or trends here, just straight-up rock. AC/DC became one of the most recognized and long-lasting bands in history by staying true to who they were. But it also meant they didn't like acts that they thought weren't real or were too popular, like the glam metal wave of the 1980s. Even though Angus never said anything bad about Bon Jovi, everyone knew that AC/DC didn't like the glam scene. With polished sounds that were ready for the radio, bands like Bon Jovi, Mötley Crüe, Poison and Def Leppard ruled the charts. Glam metal had slick production, big choruses, power songs and a big focus on looks. It was everything AC/DC thought rock wasn't. Angus and his bandmates thought rock and roll should be simple, honest and based on good sound. AC/DC were proud of the fact that they could plug their instruments into a studio and get the same raw power they used on stage. There were no fancy stage sets, levels of synthesizers or other tricks. There was just music. Bon Jovi and their friends, on the other hand, really liked the glossy, over-the-top look of the time. Their songs like Living on a Prayer and You Give Love a Bad Name were huge hits all over the world. Purists like AC/DC thought that sound was too polished and commercial, and it lacked the grit and sincerity that made rock and roll what it was. Another reason AC/DC didn't like Bon Jovi or glam metal in general was that the style was very focused on looks. The scene was marked by big hair, spandex, flashy clothes, and music videos that were full of rock star cliches. Angus Young and the other guys in his band thought it was all fake. Very different from AC/DC's simple working-class style. They didn't need hairspray or fire breathing to show how valuable they were. Simple things were what real rock and roll meant to them. Heavy drums, loud guitars, and constant energy. Not a thing more or less. When Angus thought about the Rolling Stones, he had the same strict view. In an interview with Classic Rock magazine in 1977, he said that the famous band had lost touch with their rock roots. The Stones were once a major force in the genre, but they were moving more towards soul and raw R&B, and Young didn't like what he heard. A lot of people liked that the Stones were trying new things and expanding their sound, but Angus thought they were giving up what made them great in the first place. Thick, rough rock and roll.